In this exciting episode, Hamilton Berger finally avoids defeat by excusing himself from prosecutorial duties entirely. Blame it on Fred Pike's dad, blame it. It's Perry Mason, Season 3, Episode 14, The Case of the Prudent Prosecutor. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose here, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do an episode of every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll get to some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Every episode, I give you a brief refresher on the plot. I compare it with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel it was adapted from, if applicable. Then I give you some key pieces of trivia before we tackle the episode's theme. We feature a Perry Proverb, a pearl of wisdom from the man himself, before we head to the post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library. Each episode in the Law Library, we investigate some legal conundrum in the episode so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. In this episode, as we visit the library, we cover the third leg of the objection tripod. That would be the objection that the question covers evidence that is immaterial.
Object, immaterial, incompetent, and irrelevant.
We've actually got a pretty good example of the objection trifecta in today's episode, as Special Prosecutor Daryl Teschman, aka Martin Selkirk, hears a Perry question and starts his barking.
To your knowledge, has your wife used a lipstick, the shade of which is called Latin Flame?
Your Honor, I object. This entire line of questioning is incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial.
Okay. So let's use this objection as a chance to review. Perry's question is incompetent because Asa Culver is not the right person to testify about this lipstick fact. That would be Vita Culver, Asa's wife. Second, this question would be irrelevant because it's not clear what the lipstick shade has to do with anything. Now, of course, we, the audience, know, because we just saw Della discover a handkerchief with the offending lipstick on it, that it's going to tie Vita romantically to the deceased. It's just that Perry hasn't laid the proper groundwork for this connection at all. Now, third, the question is immaterial in that Perry has not provided a logical foundation for this new piece of evidence applying to the crime. That is, let's say Asa Culver could testify about the lipstick, that he was a competent witness. And let's say that it's clear that what Perry's going after is a romantic relationship between Vita Culver and Denver Leonard. That is, the subject is at least tangentially relevant. It's still not clear what that evidence has to do with the murder. Just because Vita Culver and Denver Leonard were having an affair doesn't mean Asa somehow has to answer for it on cross-examination. Maybe Perry could spin the affair into a motive for Asa. Maybe Perry just wants to complicate Asa's testimony. But remember, this is the prosecutor's case. Perry's just cross-examining. If he wants to question Asa's bias or paint him as a potential suspect, he needs to do so when the defense presents its case. Now, all of this has a favorable, for Perry at least, TV conclusion. The judge overrules the objection.
Oh, sit down and be quiet.
Objection overruled.
Good.
Proceed, Counselor.
By my calculations, this is an incorrect ruling, but then we get the biggest kick of all, seeing Hamilton Berger cheer on the flouting of judicial procedure because it allows Perry to get his friend free. Oh my, well, wonders never cease. We better get to the plot of our episode. The case of the prudent prosecutor, gun club impresario Jefferson Pike. Looks like Elmer Fudd, talks like Walter Brennan. Just to get it out of the way, here's a montage of Pike giving us his catchphrase.
Dad, blame it. Dad, blame it. Now, Dad, blame it. That's the truth. All right, good riddance, Dad. Blame it.
Other than his authentic frontier gibberish, Pike boasts two things, a son and a temper. We see the temper first as he gets mad about the way Denver Leonard is treating his boy, so mad, in fact, that he goes mad. He gets Denver Leonard's gun and shoots himself in the leg so as to make it appear that Leonard assaulted him. Pike even gets one of Leonard's hired hands, the aggrieved Hal Kirkwood, to believe his ruse. They're gonna get Leonard in serious trouble.
Suppose if I phone the sheriff's deputy, he'd want to dig around and find that bullet? Or maybe sort of compare it with Leonard's gun?
For assault with a deadly weapon, you can put a man in prison. Did you know that?
But Pike runs into his old pal, Hamilton Berger, and now Pike's got cold feet about the gunshot frame-up.
Say, if you're Mr. Berger, the district attorney, I think you ought to...
Now, wait a minute. Hold on there, Hal. It's nothing to pester these gentlemen with.
Huh?
You better get on back home. I can tend to things myself. Later on, maybe, huh? And much obliged for your help.
Cut to Pike's boy, young Fred, a former ice skating whiz who's been disabled thanks to a car accident. He's in league with Denver Leonard more out of necessity than desire. It seems like Fred's soft on Mrs. Leonard, or at least sympathizes with her, because Denver's a grade A schnook. It's also true that Fred wrote a bad check and Denver won't let him forget it.
And look, Leonard, if this Culver dame can't skate any better than I think she can, then I don't want any part of it, no matter how filthy rich her husband is.
I suppose you told Daddy that you'd paid some of your bills by signing my name to a check, huh?
That wasn't the way it was, and you know it. Besides, you owed me a lot of back money.
I can still let the bank holler forgery.
There's more at stake here. The Culvers are in town. There's Winter Asa and Spring Vita, if you know what I mean. But mostly, Vita and Denver are just skating around each other's mouths with their tongues. Yuck.
$50,000. The suckers there are in this world, isn't it?
Well, Fred gets drunk, his dad gets mad, big surprise there, and Denver gets dead. That leads to Hamilton Berger calling on Perry. He explains why he's so devoted to Jeff Pike.
Perry, Jefferson Pike saved my life once. We were out on Marsh's Lake up in Canada. Our rubber boat got flipped over in the wind, and one of the oars caught my ankle. Pike could have left me in the duck blind and gone for help, but it was way below freezing, so instead he carried me 3 miles, all the way to shore. And in the course of wading through that icy water, he lost 2 toes. That was 12 years ago. I got him his job here at the club.
Jeff's case looks worse before it looks better, but at least it's going to give Perry more chances to brandish rifles. He also gets to make a ruckus in the daytime with a little help from Della and Pedro.
Make some noise now!
Jump up and down, will you please? Jump up and down.
Della's main find? A lipstick-stained handkerchief. Perry exposes the Vita Denver affair in court, then goes after the real murderer. Hal Kirkwood?
Mr. Mason knows who saw Pike leave his fingerprints on that gun. He's been aiming at me all along. I killed Leonard. I killed a big gas bag.
Always beware of the man volunteering evidence. It's proving to be a giveaway. Pike, has high hopes for his son and assures Hamilton that Fred's back on the straight and narrow.
Fred's on his way up to Tahoe. Pretty good job up there, I hear. Anyway, he's squaring up that check business on his own, Mr. Berger. I just want you to know that.
Meanwhile, Perry and Hamilton have a laugh about the trial's outcome while cleaning rifles. Careful where you point those things, boys. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. A Della is something about a particular actor or actress who appears in the episode. And a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. In this episode, we're introduced for the first time to the speculative investment world of ice skating.
Well, this should start the ball rolling anyway.
Tropical ice, we thought we'd call our review, huh? I'm going to make a quick trip down to Cuba to investigate the possibilities.
Now we've gotten a peek into the Lotharios that get their kicks in water skiing thanks to Belle Adrian et al. In The Case of the Angry Mourner. But this whole Denver Leonard Vita Culver Fred Pike scenario seems so absurd, it almost kind of has to be a thing, at least as a fascination of scriptwriter Jackson Gillis. So, our Paul prompt, 1960. What was the state of ice skating? Could you have a tour for this kind of claptrap? Our Della for this episode, well, we've gone and done it. We're going to feature none other than William Tallman, the titular prosecutor.
You know, I think I won this case.
You know, at some point, we've obviously got to give the bios of our 4 principal actors. Season 9's The Case of the Carefree Coronary and The Case of the Dead Ringer seem to me, at least right now, as great episodes for deep dives on William Hopper and Raymond Burr, respectively. If you've got a particular episode that you think would work well for a deep dive on Barbara Hale, Ray Collins, Bill Hopper, Ray Burr, let me know. I'm also dealing with the fact that I figure most of you know their biographies, so it may simply be redundant at this point. But it's fun to get to know more about our central characters, not just the people who show up for one episode. Anywho, the episode is a great chance to talk about Tallman later in this 3rd season. In fact, just a couple months after this episode was filmed, Tallman's going to lose his job. The case of the discharged DA. Because this episode lets us focus on Berger a little bit more than your typical episode, we actually get some backstory on Berger's character. I thought we tackled Tallman's bio and the controversy that led to his dismissal and rehiring. So here we go. 10 about Tallman. Number 1, William Whitney Tallman was born in 1915 in Detroit, Michigan. His father was an executive for an electronics company and was rich. Apparently, Bill Tallman, as he was known, took a limousine to his public school each day. Number 2, Tallman studied at Dartmouth, participated in drama there, but had to leave under tragic circumstances. So Tallman borrows another student's car to take a girl from Smith College out on a double date. He's forced off the road by a bus. The car struck a tree. Tallman, the 2 girls, they survive. The young man, however, killed. To make matters worse, the loaned auto was stolen. In disgrace, Tallman had to leave Dartmouth. Did not go to jail, though. Number 3, Tallman stays out east after leaving Dartmouth and begins his Broadway career. But then World War II hits and he gets drafted. So he ends up spending 2.5 years in the Pacific as part of the U.S. Navy. He was ultimately commissioned a major during the war after coming in as a lowly private. He arranged shows, theatrical shows. He trained service teams that won championships in baseball and boxing. All good. Number 4, after some time on Broadway after the war, Tallman goes to Hollywood in 1949. He was in 20 feature films, including crime dramas like I Married a Communist, Armored Car Robbery, The Racket, Big House USA, and Two Gun Lady. He tended to wind up dead by the end of all of his films. His most memorable role was in 1953 in a film called The Hitchhiker, where he was a kidnapper opposite Edmund O'Brien and Frank Lovejoy. I should say he was a kidnapper and a killer. Don't want to understate the severity of Tallman's crimes. Here's a clip.
They're not even close. You guys don't have to worry. Not yet. You can start sweating when they put me in this car. If they ever do.
So in the wake of that performance, Tallman was stopped at a traffic light in Los Angeles, and the driver of the car next to him was staring at him, and he asked him, "You're the hitchhiker, right?" And when Tallman said that he was, the man got out of his car, went over to Tallman's convertible, and slapped him. And Tallman looked at the guy and said, "You know, I never will get an Academy Award, but I know now that I'm a pretty good actor. If a total stranger walked up to me and slapped my face because of a performance." Number 5. Tallman tried out for the role of Perry Mason when the Perry Mason Show was being cast in 1956. He, of course, lost to Raymond Burr, who ironically had been brought in originally to read for the part of Burger. Here's what Earl Stanley Gardner had to say about Tallman. "Bill Tallman is really a wonder. He actually looks like he expects to win a case." Apparently, after Tallman got the gig, he did what he could with the role of the hapless attorney. He would come in maybe twice a week to film his scenes. But he was wont to do something that annoyed the editors and director of the show. He would offer these grossly exaggerated mug shots at Mason in the middle of courtroom scenes that would have to be cut from the show. All that being said, everybody liked him. He was friends with all of his fellow cast members. Number 6, Tallman's private life, tempestuous. Before he began his service in World War II, he got married to actress Lynn Carter. That marriage ended in 1952. They had one child, and apparently Tallman had to cough up 25% of his income to Carter for alimony. Tallman got married again to another actress, Barbara Reed, in 1953, had 2 more children, but that marriage was on the rocks in 1960. They divorced in August of that year. More about that below. Barbara Reed committed suicide in 1963, claiming in her note that she blamed her failing health. Number 7. Okay, so it's March of 1960. Tallman's a heavy drinker. He's got 3 kids. He's split from his second wife. He's paying 25% of his pay to his ex-first wife. That night, he goes to a party of Richard Rybold, who's an ad exec. The cops show up, and according to the police, the party had 4 men, 4 women. They're smoking marijuana inside a private home, and none of them have a stitch of clothing on. They get arrested for drug possession and lewd behavior. Tallman maintained he just dropped by a friend's house for a drink. Tabloids had a field day. CBS fired Tallman for violating the morals clause of his contract. They're in the middle of filming the 3rd season, so they have to make do with fill-in DAs, and they end up moving some of the Hamilton Burger episodes that had already been filmed. They had 4 in the can with Tallman to the end of the season because they didn't want to keep showing the credit sequence that featured this now disgraced actor in it. And so in the wake of Tallman's firing, they filmed a new credit sequence. Now, Raymond Burr stood up for his friends, so did Barbara Hale. They said, "Hey, this is the Perry Mason Show. Let's not judge a man before he's convicted." When the case finally got to court later in 1960, the judge threw it out on day 3. He said, "You can't be in possession of marijuana if you don't have clothes on." He didn't approve of how the partygoers acted, but also said they hadn't broken any laws. But just because he wasn't convicted of a crime didn't mean Tallman had his job back. It was December of that year, a flood of letters from appreciative fans, campaigning behind the scenes by Burr and others that got Tallman his gig back. Gail Patrick, the executive producer, apparently told Tallman that if he got so much as a speeding ticket from here on out, he'd be in big trouble. His new contract didn't guarantee him star credit for any episode he wasn't in. So if you'll notice, starting halfway through season 3, we're going to reach a point where Tallman is no longer in those opening credit sequences. And if he's not in the episode at all, his name doesn't appear in that opening sequence either. Number 8, in 1963, Berger got married for the third time to Peggy Flanagan, a divorcee he had met at a friend's poker party. Tallman adopted her 2 children from a previous marriage, and they then went on to have 2 children of their own, Susan and Tim. Number 9, after Perry Mason ended, Tallman cashed residual checks from the now in syndication show and spent 6 weeks in Vietnam entertaining the troops and working with Doris Day in a comedy western called The Ballad of Josie. What was his role? A district attorney who fails to convict a young woman of murder. He was, let's say, prepared for the part. It was his last film. Number 10, in 1968, Tallman discovered he had inoperable lung cancer. He'd been smoking at least 3 packs of unfiltered Camels a day for over 40 years. Estimated 750,000 to 1 million cigarettes in all. Apparently, when he was young, his father had offered him $1,000 and a gold watch if he reached the age of 21 without smoking, and Tallman joked that he had lost his bid for that prize before he was 12. 6 months before he died, Tallman reached out to the American Cancer Society and filmed an ad with copy that he apparently made up himself on the spot. Here's a portion.
They're not even close. You guys don't have to worry. Not yet. You can start sweating when they put me in this car. If they ever do.
Tallman died later that year. His son Tim said about the ad, people who saw it were blown away. Everything he said came straight from the heart. A lot of the info for this segment came from a really great profile of Tallman that appeared in a Detroit magazine in 2020. I will leave a link in the show notes so you can go check it out. Our Perry for this episode concerns Perry's developing relationship with Hamilton Berger. Perry's not one to let personalities get in the way of justice, but he's got to get in a few digs at his frequent courtroom opponent.
Well, I'm awake, all right. Just startled at the idea of you staying up so late drumming up business for me.
I'll defend him, Hamilton. Even if he did save your life.
What's most remarkable here is what Perry doesn't say. You mean you want me to save him? Like I have to save every client of mine you want to prosecute? Or better yet, how about remembering Jeff Pike the next time, Hamilton, you glibly charge one of my clients with murder? You weren't so sure the state's work in the case of the prudent prosecutor, now were you? We can hope. The theme for this episode is friendship. What's the problem with young Fred Pike? I would say it's a lack of friends. Ice skating, at least from the film we watch of him, looks like a lone wolf biz. There's no man his age in this town, apparently. I think it's one of the reasons Fred sympathizes with Mrs. Leonard. She seems all alone, too, and roughly his age, unlike Denver Leonard or Jeff Pike or Hal Kirkwood or the rest of this town's denizens. She'd have to be pals with Vita Culver, the woman who's stepping out with her husband, if she had to hang out with someone her own age. Just look at some of the other men in the program. We got Denver Leonard at the bar with a bunch of city folk. We got Jeff Pike, who's got his gun club. We've got Perry with his running crew, too. Friendship's important. Often we see friends recommend Perry to their friends. In this case, the prudent move was made by our prosecutor, who got his friend, Jeff Pike to consult Mason. Fred's heading to Tahoe as the episode ends. I hope he can find some friends there other than his dad, blame it. Now let's hear a Perry Proverb. You gotta love it when Perry lays it on the line with a client and uses the client's own verbal tics to do it. After a consultation with Pike, Perry gets blindsided by Hal Kirkwood's story in the hallway of the jail. Perry trots right back into the room with Jeff, closes the door, sits down, gives him the stare, and lets him have it.
Now, Dad, blame it. Let's have the whole truth.
I'm reminded of that line from the case of the nervous accomplice. You should never lie to your doctor or your lawyer. In both cases, the results could be fatal. You heard him, Jeff. Tell the truth. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each episode in the water cooler, we offer deleted scenes where we imagine some sequences that didn't quite make the episode's final cut. Our first one, Hamilton, Perry, Jeff, and other local men sit at the gun club cleaning rifles, and they periodically go off, leaving the lodge ceiling looking like Swiss cheese. No one so much as blinks. Number 2, there's a Jeff Pike montage where he considers and tries to harm himself with various implements in order to implicate Denver Leonard. He cuts himself with a butter knife. He dazes himself with the fumes from Leonard's 10-gallon hat that's been sitting in his back seat. And finally, he manages to get his arm stuck in the window of Leonard's 1959 Buick Electra. Number 3, Jeff Pike does nothing but criticize his son Fred's driving, while Fred is driving that sweet Alfa Romeo Spider he's rocking in the final scene. Fred looks at his dad as the camera pans to him, and he lets out a gigantic sigh while his dad rails about his dabbling driving. Last episode, we had a Paul prompt that asked what kind of Korean War POW memoirs are out there. My dad wrote in with 2 examples. The first is called Lost in the Cold War, the story of Jack Downey, America's longest held POW. The book just came out this month, August, in the year of our Lord 2022. Jack Downey was a 23-year-old CIA officer from Connecticut who was shot down over Manchuria. The pilots died in the crash, but Downey and his partner were captured by the Chinese, and for the next 20 years, they were harshly interrogated. Unbelievable. There's also a 2013 memoir called Memoir of a Korean War POW. I wonder what that book's about, by T.I. Han. This is a true story about the author's experience as one of the Korean War's prisoners of war. Thanks for sending those in, Dad. My own research churned up 2 books. The first is the book Tunneling to Freedom, written by John Fancy in 1957. It's the closest thing I could find to a 1950s published book about a prisoner of war. The book focuses on a man who escaped various stalags during his imprisonment. And then I found one example of military plagiarism. Apparently a man named Dennis Serendi self-published a memoir called Set Me Free in 2014. He told about his time in Vietnam, and they happen to sound an awful lot like a 1983 memoir by Robert Mason called Chicken Hawk. Hard to believe that somebody thought they could get away with it. There was a scandal, and apparently Serendi was excommunicated by his own family over the affair. Yeesh. I received a couple of fascinating letters from listeners this week that I wanted to share. David Thorpe, a jeweler from Oakland, responded to a question of mine about the accuracy of the jewelry scenes in the case of the Shattered Dream with an email that was a gold mine, jewelry pun intended, of expertise and insight. Look up David's Mercurius Jewelry on the web if you want to see what Dave is up to in his day job and cross your fingers that this guy will start a podcast about jewelry and pop culture, because I learned a lot just from what he shared. For instance, he was able to assess the financial value of the pundit's dream. By David's estimation, it was worth, in American dollars 2022, in excess of $10 million. We also received a note from our trivia maven Nancy, who writes, "Hi, just wanted to note that Madeline Rue, who played Marion Ames in her only Perry appearance in the case of The Wayward Wife, went on to become quite famous in the Star Trek world."
He just called from your house. He said he wasn't coming home and that we shouldn't try to find him.
Ship's historian, Lieutenant
Marla MacGyvers.
Yes,
I am told you participated in my rebirth.
in a small way.
She played Marla MacGyvers in Space Seed, the episode which introduced the character Khan. She falls in love with Khan and stays with him when Kirk leaves them. We learn in Star Trek II that she had become Khan's wife and that she has died. In real life, Rue could not appear in the movie because she had multiple sclerosis. Great stuff, Nancy. Thanks. As always, I'd love feedback about this episode or the podcast in general. Was there something about the episode you'd like to comment on or correct? You can email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. All Perry Pod episodes are now available via Spotify and YouTube as well as iTunes. Join us next time when we get our first episode written by Cy Salkowitz. And it ends with Perry receiving a call for his next case. You won't want to miss it. It's the case of the gallant grifter. Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat.